there are 17 goals that the United Nations has set to improve the quality of life and well-being for us all by 2030. And it's about us thinking global, but acting local. The figures make really uncomfortable reading, and I've done some research on this because I've written a very short blog about it, which you can have a look at on Twitter or on LinkedIn, and we'll share it after the session today. But 736 million people still live in extreme poverty globally. 50% of all of those people are under 18, and 1 person in every 10 is extremely poor. And it got me thinking about some of the huge stats that 1.3 billion people live in multi-dimensional poverty, and 10% of the world's population in extreme poverty. So quite hard-hitting figures, but I kind of thought, well, surely people living in poverty in the UK aren't as desperate as the global picture. And when I'd done some research around recently the Joseph Rowntree Foundation's recent report on UK poverty in 2019 and 20, there has been little change in overall poverty levels for more than 15 years, rising between 2013-14 and 2016-17. So the stats are around 14 million people are in poverty in the UK, which is more than 1 in 5 of the population. And that's made up of 8 million working age adults, 4 million children and 2 million pensioners, which is huge, and it's systemic and it's a trap. And we know that you're much more likely to be in poverty if you live in certain regions. If you live in a family, perhaps where there's a disabled person or a carer, if you work in certain sectors such as accommodation and catering, or in retail, or if you live in privately rented housing. And those who really struggle tend to be lone parents on low incomes, with insecurity across many aspects of their lives. So dehumanizing work, feeling trapped in a never-ending circle by the benefits system, and feeling stuck in unaffordable or perhaps insecure housing with no alternative. So working for a community foundation, we become uncomfortably knowledgeable about those that are living in poverty, people who need a good deal of additional support. And actually we see that the voluntary sector is often at the forefront of that work. So I'm delighted today that we're able to open up the conversation. I know that Rachel will facilitate this brilliantly. I'm going to introduce the panel to you. So we have a highly esteemed panel of people who are working in those areas, who live in our county, who are aware of the issues and the challenges of people who are living in poverty, and those who give back and support those as well who have less. So we have, I'd like to welcome Barry Rogers, who we have from Tollers Solicitors. We've worked with Barry for many years, and the trustees of the Margaret Griffin Trust. And we have a fund from Margaret Griffin that has been administered over the past 5 or 6 years, I think, and we've supported lots of organisations and groups who are alleviating poverty. I'd like to welcome Sarita Sharma from Longhurst Group again, and we've worked with what was Spire Homes, a housing association, which is now Longhurst, and they have a fund with us as well, and work with those people who live within the housing association at Longhurst. We also have Hassan Shah, one of our trustees. Welcome, Hassan. Michaela Carey-Slater, and I quote you such a lot, Michaela, because I know Baby Basics do a fabulous work working with mums who struggle and are vulnerable and at disadvantage when they have new babies. Bianca Todd, a founder of the Community Courtyard, and has worked closely in areas like Spring Boroughs, which is one of the highest areas that we see in terms of people living in disadvantaged communities, and how that can be prevented and worked with. So I know that Community Courtyard are doing a great deal of work there. We've got Care and Repair representative today, so welcome Jillian Shadwalt. And Catherine White from Growing Together Northampton. So people we know very well, people who we've either supported through the grants at the foundation, or indeed those people who are giving back to those in need. So I'm now going to welcome Rachel, who's going to facilitate the conversation.
So to our panel members around UNSDG 1, No Poverty, what local activity or commitment are you carrying out to help tackle poverty in Northamptonshire? And of course, this could be in your role as a donor, part of a giving circle, a local charity, or even in a personal capacity. And I think we'll start off with Jillian from Care and Repair.
Hi, yeah, so Care and Repair has been funded a lot through NCF, so many thanks for enabling us to help people in poverty. And how we do that really is by providing a service to those people of essential support work that otherwise they may not be able to afford to buy themselves. Basically, it wouldn't be seen as statutory provision, but nevertheless, there are essential works in the home to keep those people safe, warm and secure at home and help keep them independent. And as a lot of the people we support are in fact in poverty, they often struggle unsupported, not getting their needs met and putting them at greater risk. So through the funding we get through the Community Foundation, it enables us to provide those much needed services to those people in the home and help them keep safe and warm at home.
Thank you, Jillian. So Care and Repair obviously supporting a lot of older people who might be at risk of particularly pensioners' poverty and those with disabilities. Moving over to Nikki from Baby Basics. Tell us a bit about your commitment to tackling local poverty.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, we work with many professionals and charities and agencies across the whole county who make referrals to us of those mums and families that are very disadvantaged and very vulnerable. It could be the mum is fleeing domestic violence. It could be mental health issues, addiction. It could be real financial hardship, a whole ream of issues that mums may face. They refer to us and we create a starter pack, a Moses basket filled with items for the first 3 months of a baby's life. And initially that provides a safe place to sleep, because we know that some of our families have nowhere for anybody to sleep, let alone a baby. And of course that's not possible. So we start with a real positive start to life, giving hope for families that they can stay together, that they can have a good start to provide that baby with what it needs to thrive in its first 3 months of life.
Thank you, Mickey. So obviously Baby Basics focusing very much on supporting mums and families who are experiencing financial hardship to support the quality of life for their families. Bianca, Community Courtyard, tell us a little bit about the work you're doing locally to tackle poverty.
Yeah, so Community Courtyard is working with young people and families. We are traditionally an outreach-based service, but we're now at the Yard at 62 Gold Street, which is really exciting. And what that's been able to provide us with is an opportunity to do something we think is really important. The only way out of poverty is around education, and everything is education. So we provide a variety of opportunities for young people and their families to take part in informal education, because actually the barriers to education, it can be a real big thing. An example of that at the moment is our daily tea and toast. So people come and have some breakfast, come and have a conversation, don't realise they're learning, but it gets them back into being part of an active part of our community.
Thank you, Bianca. So Community Courtyard very much focusing on tackling child poverty and supporting young people into education and including their families in that support. Moving on to Catherine from Growing Together Northampton. Tell us how you're tackling poverty locally.
Hi, Growing Together is a community organisation based in the east of the town. And we tackle poverty in a variety of ways, some real practical things like giving out food bank vouchers and signposting people to where there is other help. But actually, I always think of poverty as broader than that. And I guess going back onto what Bianca said, one of the things we do is we run a nursery. I see poverty about being around aspiration and being around a broader category, and actually giving people the chance to develop, and people who are disadvantaged by birth almost, the chance to be more level with their peers. So our nursery, I would say, tackles poverty in a different way, along with some practical stuff. Our community work involves running groups to support people and about building relationships, and often the way you do get people to talk to you and trust you is to help them. And so we will do all sorts of things like, I don't know, we've had a load of clothes in, we're passing them on to families in the nursery, and we give out food to people, we have the Tesco's delivery, and we try and meet people where they're at and see if we can help them. Sometimes I think the best you can do is a friendly face and a cup of tea. Much harder now they can't come in the building, but hey ho, we like a challenge.
Thank you. So Catherine highlighting there the true meaning of the group's name, Growing Together. So building those relationships of trust to support children and families to help lift them out of poverty. We'll now go over to some of our donors and supporters who are taking part in the panel today. So first of all, Barry from Tollers and representing the Margaret Griffin Charitable Trust. Tell us about some of the support work you're doing in relation to tackling poverty.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Well, the Margaret Griffin Charitable Trust supports a number of local charities direct, whose objects include relieving poverty in all respects, and also, of course, financial support of NCF. We recognise that it is difficult for us as a charitable trust to sometimes locate appropriate charities for support by the trust, and which is why we have entered into these arrangements with NCF, who we think are probably more qualified, or almost certainly more qualified than what we are, to locate appropriate charities to support.
So thank you, Barry. That's the Margaret Griffin Charitable Trust, very much focused on funding local projects that are tackling poverty, so providing the investment and donations to help meet those solutions. We'll now go over to Sarita, one of our donors from the Longhurst Group. Sarita, tell us a little bit about the Longhurst Group work locally to tackle poverty.
Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me to be on the panel. Longhurst Group are doing an immense amount of work to tackle poverty. Some of my colleagues on the panel now have touched upon a few of the things that we ourselves have discovered for our customers. So child poverty, we found the national average is around 17%, but in an area where we have a lot of customers in Northamptonshire, it's around about 35%. And so we know, in line with that, and education with no qualifications, these things are all interlinked. What we're trying to do for our customers is make sure we can advise them and signpost them to services that will help them. So, for example, we have money advisors who are in place to help our customers to give money advice, help benefit checks and so on. We have income advisors so that they can ask the difficult questions to our customers and make sure they can best advise them to the services that will help them to get out of maybe the poverty difficulty that they're suffering. And we also have a new plan called Pay Plan, which again is independent, debt-free advice to help our customers, to help them get into a better position, and again signpost them to services that will help them. But the main thing is we're trying to keep our customers in their homes and make sure we can advise them and signpost them to the right services.
Thank you, Sarita. So the Longhurst Group obviously doing a lot of work to make sure their residents stay safe and well, and providing them with access to services and advice that can help them stay out of poverty and live a decent standard of living. And last but not least, we go on to Hassan, who is one of our trustees, but is also involved in other initiatives. Hassan, what are you doing to help tackle poverty locally?
Not enough, I think. What have I done? Being involved with the NCF is a start for me. Getting my practice involved through Friends of the Foundation, which is a good entry point for small businesses to help them get involved with charitable giving. The firm itself also does sort of fundraising, like many of us do in our own sort of daily working lives. I did do a Just Giving page, a personal push during COVID for Black and minority ethnic communities that were disproportionately affected during the pandemic and continue to be so. So that was just a very personal effort that I made, and we didn't raise a huge amount. We raised a couple of £1,000. But what I did learn, and this was fairly recently, what I did learn during that effort was I'd gone in naively thinking that people who end up in poverty, it's because they don't have a job, or because it's an economic problem that they sometimes maybe they've contributed to. And I came out of that 2 or 3 week effort, and I got feedback from all the people who'd got small donations from the amount that we'd collected, realizing actually 50% of the people that were in need were victims of domestic violence. And I'd never made that connection before. No doubt, I mean, it seems obvious now, and I think Mickey touched on it as well, but it hadn't occurred to me. So certainly that is something I've done, but helped me to broaden my understanding of how these problems can arise. And also learning the gritty reality that there are many people in this country who, because of their immigration status, have no recourse to public funds. And so again, something that you're aware of, but actually until you see it and you see the person who's standing in front of you saying, actually, we don't have enough money to feed our children, it doesn't bring the reality home. So I go back to my original answer, which is, I don't think I'd do enough, but I'd like to do more, and hopefully this conversation will inspire me and to do so.
Thank you, Hassan. So Hassan, through his role volunteering and fundraising and being part of a giving circle, has highlighted to him in poverty that there are some communities within our local county and indeed within wider society that have been disproportionately affected and at risk of poverty, particularly during this public health crisis, particularly our BAME communities, those at risk from domestic violence, and those with no recourse to public funds. Some of those thematic communities and their high risk you may or may not have been aware of as an audience. So we're going to kind of open up the conversation a little bit and allow for our panel anyway to sort of jump in. This event is, just to let you know, is obviously part of Challenge Poverty Week. And please do, as you're going along, #Challenge Poverty, quote the Northamptonshire Community Foundation with any media comments, social media comments that you make. So I'm going to start off with a quote from Nelson Mandela, presenting this to the panel. Nelson Mandela once famously said on poverty that poverty is like slavery and apartheid, in that poverty is not natural, it is man-made, and it can be overcome and eradicated by the action of human beings. With further resources available to local community groups and charities and the county in general, what local solutions would the panel like to see being funded? And is there any specific type of poverty you think is an urgent priority, such as child poverty, pensioner poverty, or homelessness? So without much further ado, I'll go to Catherine first from Growing Together. Catherine.
Hi, sorry, chipping in. I like that question. I like the quote. I think the thing we need to think about is a bit backing on what Hassan said about why people are living in poverty and what we can do to try and support that. So it's much more complicated than thinking of a food parcel. I'm not knocking giving food parcels. They are absolutely the thing that's needed at the time. But actually seeing that backstory, and as Hassan said, getting to meet people and understand their story helps you decide what to do to help them. One of the things we try and do is to work with what I describe as low-level mental health. So people who, from no fault of their own, aren't able to perhaps parent, cope, manage their finances as other people do. And so it's about trying to get in there and support people. So I think it's about those relationships, which I'm always banging on about, but that make the difference to people, to give them a help. And alongside that is education, and that's a much broader discussion. But how can we really ensure that some of the issues that are around now with young families don't happen when those children become parents? I think a lot of issues around parenting are generational. People that have always lived in poverty and not been able to get out of that. And that makes a real challenge for us all. I could bang on, but I'm conscious of not doing that. But the only other thing I would just raise is housing. I think housing is critical to poverty. We've got several families that are living in 1-bedroom accommodation with 2 children, 2 or 3 children. And I'd say it to my own friends and family, I challenge anyone to have lived this year in a 1-bed flat without a garden with 2 young children. You may not be such a good parent at any of us. So, you know, there's some practical stuff there.
Catherine, thank you. And one of the things I particularly noted that you said is about the importance of, when we are working to tackle local poverty, about building relationships and meaningful connections to really understand what people's day-to-day life is, and building their trust in order to support them.
And not to judge them.
No, of course. Yeah. Moving over to, I see Jillian, you've got your mic off.
I mean, obviously we're seeing people of all ages, but a lot of the people that we support are in fact older people. And what we actually see is a lot of the pensioners who actually do not claim any benefits. Often I think that's a generational thing. They don't feel the need to claim benefits. They don't want people knowing their business possibly. And they've always been happy to cope as they are. And so what we try and do, as Catherine said, it's very much about that networking, working with other partnerships, not just trying to do what your little bit. It's about looking much broader than that. So, for example, we try and encourage people to, particularly with Community Law Service, we work very closely. So we will try and encourage people to allow us to refer them to get their benefits and things checked as well. From our perspective, that's what we try and do. Because actually quite a lot of the people we support, if they're not claiming benefits, potentially they could be. So that's about education, but also opening up the mindset to allow themselves to, to be referred on to do that as well.
Okay, thank you, Jillian. So obviously a key point there, highlighting some maybe issues of hidden poverty that we might not be aware of, that pensioners and older people are not collecting the benefits that they have right to, and that's putting them at risk of poverty. You also mentioned about education. Bianca, you're obviously big on education. How would you like to respond to this question and to what's been said by the panel so far?
Okay, I think that one of the most important things when we're looking about how we eradicate poverty is about the approach that we take. Historically, we've spoken about partnership work, but we know that doesn't actually work. It's just a word that we put down on pieces of paper. And actually what recessions do is they make us very competitive as organisations. If we're going to tackle poverty successfully, we have to use the word collaboration, and it has to mean something. Do you mean it has to be more than just a set of words? We have to look at people as not belonging to us, but being part of a community that we are also a part of. And so we need to see people less as service users, but more as people who we engage with. And so we need to think very much about the language that we use very much from the beginning in terms of that. When we look at what is an urgent priority for poverty, I think as we are possibly about to have a circuit break in a couple of weeks, where we're all going to be on lockdown again, in Spring Boroughs and Castle Ward, I'm very aware that 40% of people don't have access to the internet. 40%. I mean, let that sink in Northampton. Do you mean? So how do they access anything? If you want to get your shopping done online, God forbid you could afford to do such a thing anyway, but you'd have to do that. So what happens if you're a young person who could be doing very well at school, but your family only have one smartphone to do your schoolwork? So I do think there is a new poverty that is creeping up on us, which we have to be very careful about, and that's the internet poverty. I don't think there's a priority for all of them. I think they all simultaneously need to be addressed.
Okay, thank you, Bianca. Some really key points there about collaboration and meaningful partnership work. Obviously, the decrease in ability to fundraise has put extra demands and pressures on local community groups and charities. Some more competition for funding and access to it, as you said. The language that we use when we speak about people in poverty and people experiencing financial hardship, and being mindful of working alongside people rather than doing to, and also the emergence of new poverty, digital exclusion, and a really alarming statistic about the reality in Spring Boroughs and Castle. So thank you for bringing that to the fore in this panel conversation. Moving over to Michaela, did you want to respond to those points and your own thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we do properly work together. But I think the thing that stood out to me was humanisation. We talk numbers, we talk statistics, but actually they represent people and individuals that are facing real situations, that have real lives, and I think that's something that we need to really promote if we're talking about poverty. And people can have very negative views of poverty and people in poverty, and some of the rhetoric is really quite harsh to hear, and yet these are people and we could be in their situation, and I think we can forget that if we're not careful. We can forget that, you know, some of us are very close to being perhaps homeless, or to not having our jobs, to be made redundant, or to be facing the need for a food bank. You know, we can I think we need a bit more compassion, and I think that is something that we are going to see grow, particularly as we're facing the ongoing impact of COVID. We're going to see more people facing poverty, and we are going to need greater compassion once more.
Thank you, Michaela. You've actually dovetailed nicely after we speak to our next three panel members into the next question. So we're going to tackle that head on in terms of the humanisation of members. But I think you made a really important point there about the fact that we're all probably 1 or 2 paychecks away from being in a set of similar circumstances. And so actually focusing, as Bianca said earlier, seeing people alongside ourselves rather than doing two. And as you quite rightfully say, compassion, leading back to Catherine's point about building trust and meaningful relationships with people that you're helping. We'll move on to speaking to Barry. Barry from Margaret Griffin Charitable Trust. How would you like to respond to the panel and your own thoughts about local solutions?
Yeah, it's difficult for me to really respond to this as a funder in terms of the question that's been raised, but I do think it's difficult to prioritise any of the identified types of poverty, and all of them are probably equally urgent priorities. I'm more interested in, as we are doing, hearing the comments and views of the panel as to how they each approach the relief of poverty. Our role as a charitable trust is to provide that financial support. That's where I'm coming from, really.
Okay, thank you, Barry. So there are donors and trusts and people of generosity who would like to help invest further resources into the local solutions to help tackle poverty. And there's obviously a role here for us having the opportunity to listen to some of the new emerging elements of poverty and what work's happening on the ground to help us highlight and prioritise some of the approaches that perhaps should be funded going forward. Sarita, would you like to join the conversation at this point and give thoughts?
Yes, I'd love to, thank you. One of the key things that I found in my role is all the types of poverty is all interlinked. So for example, homelessness, for somebody to be able to get a home and be able to move up the ladder to get a job, well, if they're homeless, they can't get a job, they can't get into work. Fuel poverty, as a couple of the panel members have mentioned, we've got older people who are unable to heat their own homes, or have prolonging illnesses which negatively will impact other areas of their life. You've got child poverty, fuel poverty, food poverty, and homelessness, and it's all just interlinked. It's such a vicious cycle, and we need to be able to address each one of those. And like Bianca said, Longhair's group are very hot on collaborative working. We can't solve everything on our own, none of us can, but if we all work together and try and have a collaborative approach, use our resources together, and that's our skill set, our knowledge, and any finances we can bring into it, we'll be able to help a lot more people. And what we try to do as an organisation, it's from our research, and what we've found is we can provide the homes and the bricks and mortar, but our customers need more than that. We have communities that need more support, and as I mentioned before, that's where our money advisors come in, our income advisors. We offer counselling services. We work with the local food banks. When COVID first started, we knew the food banks were struggling. So we knew that trying to get them food would be very difficult because my own colleagues were struggling. So what we realised would be better is to give a cash donation so they could hit into their own resources to get the supplies that they needed for their customers.
Thank you, Sarita. So a prescient point there about poverty is poverty is poverty. It doesn't matter if it's period poverty, child poverty, pensioner poverty, food poverty. They're all a priority if it's impacting on people's ability to have a basic or expect a basic standard of living. And the importance too of collaboration, that's echoing another panel member's comments on that, and working strategically together to help tackle poverty locally. Hassan, your final comments before we move on to the next question around what's been said so far in local solutions.
I want somebody to invent a thought control machine. I think it's called the press, isn't it? And why I say that is because the psychology and the thinking is, I think, for me, where the solution is. It's so easy for us to think, especially during times of recession, I need to keep what's mine. Have I got enough for myself? Have I got enough for my own family? And then also, why do we bother trying to, feed the world and feed everybody else? We can only ever scratch the surface. So why do we bother at all? And that's a really dangerous way to think, but it's a really widespread way of thinking, and it's more so at the moment. It's a popular way of thinking. Do our politicians exploit those fears and help cash in on that for their own political purposes? So the thinking, the thought, Michaela spoke about compassion and humanity and rhetoric, and it's all of those things. But I think a way of getting us all and holding our politicians to account as well for some of their rhetoric and some of their sometimes divisive tactics. So I don't want to launch into a political diatribe, and you should have the ability to mute me yourself, Rachel, I think. But I think that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Hassan. I think what I would sum up in what you're trying to say there is, where have we along the way lost the belief in the common good, and the belief in the common good, a good life for everybody, as opposed for prioritising oneself? And I think that moves really well into our next question to the panel, and that is, how do you think we can all work together, and particularly here in Northamptonshire, to help shift negative attitudes or stereotypes about people who are living in poverty? And I will start with Catherine.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for being first again, Rachel. I think it's a real issue actually about the attitude towards poverty, and I think it's a difficult one. I've been sidetracked by listening to reading some of the chat stuff, and I think this is the things that we've talked about are national issues, probably global, but let's keep realistic, and we can't deny the sort of political aspect to a lot of where we're at. So I think we do need to do some campaigning type work. And I know the foundation have been good at trying to encourage that to happen. I think you need to tell stories so people realise that thing we all say we're only 3 paychecks away. I think a lot of people it's less than that. We don't have a paycheck to begin with, and just what that really must feel like, and is helpful to help get people to understand it. I think generally people who aren't in this world like us don't understand the impacts of 10 years of austerity and how few services there are out there for people. People still think that social workers go and visit someone in their home. Well, how ridiculous would that be in this current climate? No one does anything like that. No one gets that sort of support, and our families out there are completely isolated. And I think that is a reflection of you say years of austerity. I'm rambling, so I'll shut up.
No, I think your point is prescient, Catherine, about people in positions of privilege don't understand the realities perhaps of day-to-day life, and how close many of us are potentially to experiencing poverty, and the impact of the budget cuts to local authorities and services, where people would normally have taken to a certain extent for granted a well-resourced safety net. That's no longer there, and perhaps organisations like yours are picking up the pieces. Moving on to Nikki from Baby Basics. How do you think we can help shift negative attitudes towards people who are living or experiencing poverty?
Yeah, I think what's been said about story, it's humanizing it again. It's giving it a real truth as to what it is, because maybe people in power don't have any idea of what it's like. But if I'm honest, neither do I. Even those of us who are working from a really privileged position, we don't know what it's like to be living in that one bedroom with all those people, to even have a bedroom. You know, we don't have that experience necessarily, and it's having that face of reality, those people, making it human and making it real. We are people who love story, and that's the way that humans work, is that connection. But actually we need to hear some of those stories of what people are facing, and how people have kind of triumphed over some of that adversity as well. And I know that we've been looking at working at a project promoting people's stories, so that they can see that, you know, it's not about blame. It's not about saying that, you know, this is what the choices that people have made. Sometimes there are choice elements in it, but more often than not, it's systemic, it's generational, and it's stuff that happens because life can be difficult, and people find themselves in situations that they could never have dreamt of. So we need to make this real to people by sharing the reality of it, by sharing people's true stories, I think.
Thank you, Michaela. So Michaela, basically, in a word, saying dispense with the numbers, and let's hear more people's stories, real life stories, so that we can connect and understand and make that emotional, empathetic connection with people and their experiences, because these are the people who are experts by experience, by virtue of what they've been through. Hassan, would you like to come in at this point?
Michaela keeps on saying exactly what I'm about to say. So it's exactly that. Attitudes, real life stories. I'm going to read this. It'll probably take 30 seconds. The Just Giving effort I did, I got feedback from the various people that we helped, and this is this was from Zim Women, actually, African association that many of you will be familiar with. Person A became homeless 3 years back after domestic violence. She's been on social housing, moving from one accommodation to another. That's another thing sometimes we forget. With her 2 children, who are 10 and 15. She was finally given a permanent home just over 8 weeks ago. The house was empty. We managed to get her a mattress and covers and a cooker just a week ago from the charity link. However, there is a need for an electrician to install the cooker so that she can start cooking proper meals. But for now, we are providing her food parcels and cooked meals. Her children, 10 and 15, 15-year-old's a girl who now has grown into a woman and has monthly sanitary and other toiletry needs. So that's just one of the stories that I was sent in terms of feedback from that Just Giving project. And how much stuff is there in that that one simple story? So that, I think, is how we get people to re-engage, is to tell them those stories.
Thank you, Hassan. I think you highlight a quote that is relatively famous, which is, it's very expensive to be poor. And I think it was Oscar Wilde, but I think people understood the day-to-day complexities of how you're penalised by being on a very low income. They would recognise that poverty is not a personal choice. It's often people up against a lot of barriers and a lot of unfair systems. Bianca, moving over to you from the panel.
Hiya. I was just thinking about what you said there, Rachel. When we think about poverty, we think about the fact that lots of people, when they're donated stuff, have the cheap shoes. Do you mean? But we learned from history, but unless you get a good pair of shoes, do you mean there's nothing cheap about it, because you have to keep replacing them? I think in order to answer this question, how do we shift negative stereotypes and attitudes, it's about how we use our resources. Who comes into the yard? Is it just people who are experiencing poverty? No, it isn't. It's the whole community. Why is it the whole community? Because people who are experiencing poverty are part of the community, as are other people. I also think one of the important things when we're telling people's stories is to ensure that those stories don't capture them in poverty. Do you mean that we don't make them the face of poverty, that we actually provide people with a hope to escape poverty? Do you mean, so how do we share people's journeys as well as the instant where they are at the moment? Because unless we give people hope, there is no escape from poverty. So the stories must be filled with hope, and that must be through us funding good quality services. Do you mean making sure that people can wear good shoes on their feet rather than the rubbish ones, make sure they can eat the food that we want to eat? Do you mean I'm really fed up of people donating shit food, to excuse my language? Why can't people who are poor eat good food? We all want to eat good food. So why do we raise it? So if we raise our expectations for people, let it be all people, let it not just be our own families. I think when we raise our expectations for what we can expect of people, we can achieve great stuff. So if you come to the tea and toast at the yard, the toast will be good bread, will be proper butter, and probably some good homemade jam. That's
Thank
how
you,
we change
Bianca.
people's lives.
I think you're making a key point there about returning to the common good and not treating people like they're on a poverty safari. So we're looking at people's lives in real term and sharing our the most upheld values around compassion, justice and dignity, I think is the key word that's being highlighted there. Thank you. Moving to Jillian, your thoughts.
Just really reiterating what's been said about sharing real stories, compassion, changing attitudes, negative attitudes, and showing positive outcomes from what can be achieved, especially when people work together. And I think this is highlighted as well, that there's various panel members here that we need to be connected. I think Hassan said about a lady who needed a cooker wiring in. We could actually potentially go and do that for her free through some of the funding that we could have. So I think it's really important as well that we're all sharing our resources. We also see quite a few people who have been victims of domestic abuse of all ages. So again, I think we all need to be talking and working together to maximise outcomes that we can achieve for people.
Thank you, Jillian. I think, and what you're possibly saying there as well is by through working together, we can hold a barrier of support against those negative attitudes and stereotypes that seep in, and be those advocates for those individuals as well. Sarita, did you want to come in at this point?
Yes, absolutely. Again, like Hassan was saying, a lot of the people have said things that viewpoints that I already share, but I come back to that collaborative approach, sharing the good stories. On the Longhurst website, we have quite a few good stories, the ones that our customers are willing for us to share, where we've tried to make a positive difference with our actions and what we're doing, going beyond the bricks and mortar and looking further at what they need as individuals, but also in the community. And there are lots of good stories that we can share to change the face of what people perceive as poverty to be, but also, as I said earlier, about understanding how poverty is all interlinked. One leads to the other. So we have to make sure we're addressing the core issues. And as other people have said on the chat, we've got to go past the talking. We need to be taking positive action to get these positive results now, and share those good stories and make sure we're ambassadors of this to show people. And also, I think it comes back to something we've been talking about since the back end of last year, is showing people about being kind. No judgment is necessary. Just be kind, one human being to another. How can we help each other?
Thank you, Sarita. So what we're saying there is about changing the narrative locally, taking positive action, working in collaboration, and also actively listening to what people's stories are telling us about their lives and how we can support to change them. Barry, any final thoughts before we move on to the final question?
Yeah. Just to say, well, as has already been said, it's got to be telling the story and publicising those stories as much as possible. And of course, NCF continuing to provide the sort of centralised support that it already provides. That is key to it as well, I think.
Thank you, Barry. So we're at our final panel question, and we'll be moving over to Q&A. So thank you very much for the questions that have been posted so far. I think we'll have enough time to answer most of them. So panel, This is no mean feat, and it's a bit of an ambitious question to ask, but tell us what it is anyway. What is your vision for Northamptonshire in 2030, and what do you hope we can have achieved by then to eradicate poverty on our doorstep? And I will start with Mickey from Baby Basics.
Wouldn't it be great if I was made redundant because I wasn't needed? You know, I would definitely be up for that. That would be the absolute dream. For Baby Basics, our vision is that every child, every baby in Northamptonshire has a safe place to sleep, just to protect them. And that's kind of what we're working towards. And I think realistically, that's not just going to come through us doing what we do on a day-to-day basis. You know, we need what we do, and it's vital and it's fantastic. But I think it's that systemic change. I think we need to be campaigning. I think we need to see things come from the top down. Our communities are amazing, and we wouldn't be able to do what we do without our community, who do surround us, who perhaps do understand, who give so much to us as a charity. But we're kind of fighting fire. And really we need to kind of get to the source of it, and I think that needs to be systemic change. I think that needs to be a political level that actually says that as a nation we are going to support each other, not just as a community here, but as a nation. That is what we are going to hold as our value, that people matter from the bottom up.
Thank you, Michaela. So a change at the national and local policy level, which reduces the burden on the charitable sector and makes groups like your own less likely to have to exist in the first place. Moving over to Jillian. Jillian from Care and Repair, rather.
I think as well that also I think we need that buy-in at local level from the county council. I think the voluntary sector are very much part of the solution, and they're not the solution, but they're very much part of the solution in help those in poverty and helping to ease that poverty. I don't think we recognise the part that we play, and I think this risk of some of the sector, you know, folding and stopping the fantastic work that we will do. I think a lot of us are ourselves as organisations living from month to month, never knowing if we're going to be here in 6 months' time. And that's going to have a massive impact on the people that all of us support, and actually costs, you know, local government a lot more money in the long run. So I think there needs to be that local buy-in as well of the fantastic support that we all do in our hard work and how important it is.
Thank you. So highlighting the importance of the collaborative work through the local voluntary and community sector, and making sure that local government recognises that as well. Moving over to Bianca, Community Courtyard. Just mindful of the time, everybody. So in order to get some Q&A in, can we try and streamline our responses?
The best way to eradicate poverty is to ensure that all of the people that we work with feel like they have a voice in their own community and are able to take action at every level. And to remember that every decision that's been impacted against them has been a political decision, and they can make an equally different political answer to that. It doesn't have to be this way. A better world is possible.
Thank you. So Bianca's saying that poverty is a political choice and that we should empower local people who are experts by experience to have the platform to influence policy change. Thank you. Moving over to Catherine.
Hi, I think it's been said really. I would absolutely agree with what I've heard. I think there's that national dimension, and there's also let's keep going locally and doing what we can do, because it does come down to that as well. But yeah, the national dimension is the critical one, actually. Policy is critical.
Thank you. Hassan.
How do you end poverty in the next 10 years in Northampton? I don't know. Structural change, root and branch. Starting in the home, family, support structures, education, opportunities, jobs for people so they can help themselves out of poverty. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge ask, but we've got to make a start.
Thank you. So we've got to start somewhere, hence the introduction of these community conversations to highlight and keep a conversation going on locally. And this will be the first of many. Moving over to Barry, your final thoughts.
Just to say that I agree with everything that's been said so far, and also how about to have eradicated homelessness in Northamptonshire by 2030.
Thank you, Barry. And Sarita, your final thoughts before we pick on some Q&A from the audience.
I think we've mentioned the national side, but I also think it's enabling our customers to be able to help themselves. So developing their skill sets, basic things like budgeting. So once we have got their income levels where they need to be, to make sure they know how to budget, because a lot of people, it's inherent learnt behaviour. They won't know how to manage their own money or how to manage the things that they have. So I think it would be great to be able to enable people. And for 2030, child poverty, it absolutely breaks my heart to know how high child poverty is, especially in the areas we're working in.
Okay, so the panel, thank you so much for your responses to those 4 questions. As I said, we're going to keep the community conversation going. This recording will be shared, but we're going to move over to some Q&A. I'm going to pick up on a couple of questions and ask 1 or 2 of the panel members to respond. And we've got a question here from Steve Summers, who says, poverty is often a cause of, or at least exacerbated by, unjust systems, poor housing, job opportunities. How could and should we engage with those who can make decisions in Northamptonshire that can adversely affect people? And I'll go to Catherine to respond to this one.
Hi, completely agree with Steve, although I do understand that sometimes locally they are tied by national guidelines and structures and what have you. I'm a long time worked in the voluntary sector and believe in the power of it working together. I know that Vin are currently looking at setting up a forum, and I think we need to really support those sorts of structures where we can work together and talk to each other. All I would say is that let's not be naive about it. I'm old enough and long enough in the tooth to know that it's very difficult. That just because we all work in the same sector, we don't all have the same views, and it isn't always straightforward. But we need to try, because if we don't try and all work together, it's going to make us fragmented. I think it's important. So use the structures that exist. NCF are great at getting people together as well, but make sure we're all trying to be on the same page.
Thank you, Catherine. Judy and Paul from HD Media have made a comment that they think it's really important to always keep an eye on the national situation. And it's very easy to say think global, think global, act local, but much harder to do this. And if we all start making a small and local difference, we can really have a big impact locally. Bianca, what's your thoughts about that? Thinking global but acting local.
I like to think that we're all led by the global. Do you know what I mean? We start off with the environment, we think about the housing, we know that COVID is global, and all we can do at those moments is do something in our own homes, in our own community. Do you know, we can't change everybody's world, but we can change somebody's world. And that's the challenge, isn't it? We don't have to change everybody, but if we all change a couple of people's world, and quite frankly, Northampton isn't just going to exceed in 2030. We're going to be one of the best places to live in the country. It's completely possible. A better Northampton is possible. And quite frankly, with the people on the panel, it's doable.
Thank you. So that's Bianca showing a kind of endorsement of the think global, act local, leave no one behind message from the United Nations, and celebrating the calibre of the charitable sector and those who give generously locally. We've got a final question here from Nikki Farah Hayton from Home Start. And she is asking the question to the panel. I'm very interested to hear what the panel's views might be to working towards reducing the very real housing crisis that is facing a very large number of people that they're currently working with. And I'll open that up. I'll start with Jillian from Care and Repair.
That's a really hard one to answer. I mean, obviously from our perspective, we're trying to keep people in their homes, so helping to avoid unnecessary homelessness. If people are supported in the home to remain there, that obviously helps reduce the pressures on more people becoming homeless, when actually that could be avoided with necessary resources being put into place. So I think that's a really good start with that.
Okay, passing on to Mickey.
Yeah, housing. don't think it's a particularly my specialist subject, housing, if I'm honest, but I think we do need to be working together to see that people are aware of the crisis and the need, and to bring it up to a higher standard as a baseline. I think we need a baseline that says, you know, that people deserve to live in a house that is positive, that is clean, that is a healthy environment. But again, I think it is achievable if we work together. But I'm sure there are other people on this panel who know much more about housing than I do.
Thank you. And we'll move over to Sarita, whose specialism is around housing. Sarita, what's your response to Nikki's concerns about stopping a housing crisis happen?
Thank you, Rachel. No pressure there. I absolutely understand why Nikki would raise that question, and it is extremely difficult. In terms of housing, I work for an organisation that provides social housing, and a lot of what we do is actually led by government to what they feel is needed, and what comes up in my area, it's called a housing list. So it isn't just down to the housing providers. We are led by other organisations to what we can supply and in what areas. We look at, for Longhurst, we are predominantly in the East Midlands, so that's our focus. In this area, we've got properties in Northampton, and Rushton's our larger area. But we are, again, as I keep saying, we are led by government and localised government as well to where they want us to build.
Just picking up on a couple of points, Nikki is saying she's thinking especially about poor landlords who are overcharging for unsuitable housing, and Bianca's very kindly come back. Don't know if you want to speak to this point, Bianca, about becoming members of ACORN.
So ACORN is a community union that supports people in poor housing, stops landlords from evicting them. It's one of the best community unions that I can recommend. And quite frankly, if we haven't got a branch in Northampton, I think after this conversation, I'm going to set one up. So watch this space. I know not a lot about housing, but I'm going to set up a branch of ACORN so we can stop it, all the evictions, which inevitably will start happening due to this horrific government and its failure to tackle poverty.
So there is an offer from Bianca there to set up a local community union to support people at risk of being evicted from their homes and the issues that they may experience from landlords overcharging them. Earlier on, Steve Summers had mentioned the idea of setting up a poverty truth commission. So that's something that we'll share a link to. I think there's something up in Gateshead, Newcastle, which has been set up similarly. We have recently taken part of it as a food poverty scrutiny panel, and I assume that it's something similar. It's holding local change makers to account. I've been really inspired by the contributions to the panel, their dedication, their commitments, and I've been kind of really shocked by some of the statistics that have been mentioned, such as the levels of digital exclusion which are taking place within our community. I think there is a lot of goodwill and specialism and expertise here to help tackle some of the pressing issues around poverty within Northamptonshire and within the respective areas that we work. We've seen a lot highlighted about collaboration, the challenges to the charitable sector in terms of access to funding, the need to tell people's stories with dignity and allow them a voice, as well as moving away from numbers and sharing stories and good news stories about how people, through a bit of support and help, can get back on their feet. And just to reiterate the point that Victoria made, that 1 in 5 UK citizens are living in poverty, and some of those individuals, their basic human needs are not being met. And as a group and as a network, we're going to continue community conversations across, you will see the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals behind me, across these themes, and keep the community conversation going in order for us to be able to commit to helping tackle that United Nations Sustainable Development Goal. Hassan is going to say thank you to the panel and thank you to our audience. Hassan.
Yeah, thank you. It was donors, those who are working at the coalface in the communities, our audience, NCF, everybody, thank you so much for being involved. I jotted down some words which sort of sprung out as we were going through that hour or so, and I'll read them out to you. It's education, hidden poverty, digital exclusion, and some of this stuff, as I say, is unless somebody says it to you, you hear it in the ether and ignore it. But actually, it's been, for me personally, it's been such a rewarding hour. Collaboration, compassion, humanity, and I thought I'd finish using some of the more positive words that we heard during the course of the last hour. We heard about good stories and good news stories, and the importance of that, and hope, and never to underestimate that or to let it go. I said it was a huge ask, but we've got to make a start somewhere. But I'll finish with something that Bianca said, which was good shoes and good jam. So thank you very much, everybody.